Welcome to this poetry lesson on Moving Through the Silent Crowd by Stephen Spender. This is one of the poems in the current IEB poetry syllabus for 2023 to 2025. As it is with all poetry, it is really important that you read the poem for yourself and you try to analyze it yourself first to really gain an understanding and to practice your poetry analysis skills, because you will need that in your final exams before you actually jump into a lesson like this. Also, please remember that poetry has many interpretations, and so while I have tried to be as comprehensive as possible and tried to give as many details as possible in this lesson, you may find other interpretations and other observations as you do some research around this poem and as you look at other people analyzing this poem. And I strongly recommend that you do that. Try and get as many perspectives as possible. It'll really help cement your understanding and just give you a broader perspective of this poem. But without further ado, let's jump right into this lesson. So first of all, our poet, it's super important to understand the background about the poet. Understanding the poet's background and where they're writing from can really inform your understanding of the poem itself. And in the case of this poem, it is of the utmost importance that you understand who Stephen Spender was and why he wrote poetry like this and kind of what his worldview was as he was writing poetry like this. So Stephen Spender lived from 1909 to 1995, so he was, he lived his whole life in the 1900s, and as we know, the 1900s was a century that went through so much change technologically, socially, politically, economically, and a lot of those changes affected him deeply, influenced him, and really we see in a lot of his poetry, specifically this one. So he was an English poet, a novelist, and an essayist, and a lot of his works really focused on social injustice, on class struggles, and this was mainly influenced by the events of the 1930s, which were the Great Depression, the Spanish Civil War, and then of course the world wars that followed late in the 1930s and into the 1940s, and obviously World War I, which had happened before this time and which the world was still feeling the effects of. His poetry is often very self-critical, but still very compassionate, and it looks at the experience of living, which is a subjective thing. It looks at what it means to be a human being and what it means to live in this world, and specifically, again, focusing on those class struggles and social injustices and what those mean when we are living and this experience of living. He had a reputation for being very honest in, the way he was, but also in his poetry. And he also looked at things with a very humanist perspective. He was really focused on the human beings behind these issues that he kept talking about. And it was really important for him that he focused on those things. And just a little bit about his kind of political affiliations. He did actually join the Communist Party in 1936, but by the 1940s he'd grown really disillusioned with the Communist Party and its ideologies, and he actually left the Communist Party after that. And so you can see he really grappled with the world around him and the different systems at play and how they were affecting people, and this comes through in his poetry. So when we look at the poem that we're going to be studying, Moving Through the Silent Crowd, some of the background there is the Wall Street crash of 1929 that led to the Great Depression, and obviously this created mass starvation. Men were not able to provide for their families. There's often these pictures of the people queuing at the soup kitchens because they can't find food for themselves, and many people were living on a poor subsistence diet. And honestly, unemployment was skyrocketing. It was an all-time high, and people were not making money. People could not provide. And the purpose behind this poem is to provide a social commentary on this suffering that he was seeing in the world, specifically the suffering of the working class men in London during the Great Depression. And this poem does focus on working class people. It focuses on the men in that time, and it is really influenced by what he was seeing in reality, in real life, is seen in this poem. If we have a look at this poem and we just read through it before we get started, it's so important that you read the poems before you get started into analyzing them and just kind of get a full perspective of this entire poem. So it says, moving through the silent crowd who stand behind dull cigarettes, these men who idle in the road, I have the sense of falling light. They lounge at corners of the street and greet friends with a shrug of shoulder and turn their empty pockets out, the cynical gestures of the poor. Now they've no work like better men who sit at desks and take much pay. They sleep long nights and rise at 10 to watch the hours that drain away. I'm jealous of the weeping hours. They stare through with such hungry eyes. I'm haunted by these images. I'm haunted by their emptiness. So, I mean, immediately just off of reading that, this is not a happy poem. This is not going to end in a fairy tale happy ending. You do get this very kind of somber, sad, depressing mood from this poem while you're reading it. And it's important that you feel that, because that is what the entire poem is about. We just get a bit of an overview of the poem before we jump into a line-by-line analysis. At first glance, the speaker does seem to be judging poor people. There's some harsh phrases that are used, there's some harsh observations, and he's comparing their lives to those who are richer, those who are more privileged, and so he seems to really be judging their daily habits, especially in comparison to those who are richer. But on a deeper level, we see that he's actually commenting on the heartlessness of the upper class that don't seem to be stepping in to help these people, and more than that, just the complete indifference of the capitalist system that the poor people are subject to. You know, they can't get out of the system. They're trapped in the system that failed them ultimately with the Wall Street crash, and there's nothing that can be done, and that contributes to that hopelessness, that complete, like I said, that somber, depressing sadness in this poem. If we look at the perspective, the speaker is a third person kind of author, observer, so he is writing about what he is seeing on the streets, and the streets are the setting of this poem. It's the streets of London where he's seeing these people, but he is a third person spectator if we look at what he's doing. And by the end of the poem, we do get some of his personal feelings, but for the most part, it is this author-observer perspective that we're getting. And then if we look at the atmosphere that is given off with this poem, it really, like I said, has a sense of hopelessness, this lack of work, the lack of money, and then goes through showing the speaker's irritation with the system and the concern he feels for these people, and the compassion that he feels for these people. And it might not necessarily come across as like your stereotypical compassion, but in showing his concern and by observing what's happening around him, there is a sense of compassion of, oh my goodness, look at these people and look at how they have to live and how hopeless they are. When we look a bit at the structure and the form, remember structure and form are always super, super important to know when it comes to a poem. So it is a 4-stanza poem. Each stanza has 4 lines, and then most of the lines, interestingly, actually have 8 syllables. And so the rhythm of this poem creates a consistent tempo that reflects the movement of walking through the streets. Because remember, the speaker is walking through the streets and showing you or speaking about what he's observing as he's walking. And so the poet has very cleverly allowed the structure and form of this poem to mimic him walking through the streets. Now, it is free verse, i.e. there's no rhyming pattern, and this reflects the process of the speaker's observation as well as the personal views of the poet. And I see now that my reflects there has got an apostrophe S. Please ignore that. We all know that that is completely incorrect, and I should have proofread this better before I started recording. Reflects there should not have an apostrophe S. But that free verse, that no rhyming pattern, really shows kind of just how he's observing and how his observations just go from the one thing to the next thing. And it's just a really, really lovely reflection in the format and the structure of what is actually happening with the speaker and what the speaker is doing. So if we have a look at the mood, as I said earlier, it's very gloomy, it's very somber, it's a bit ominous. You know, you get a bit of an unsettled feeling while you're reading this poem, but then it does shift to sorrowful. It shifts to very concerned for these people. The tone is initially critical. It seems that he is very judgmental, and is definitely critical by the end of the poem, not necessarily for the poor people, but for the system. And it does kind of change over into being solemn and empathetic for the rest of the poem. And then if we have a look at the title, Moving Through the Silent Crowd, that moving reflects the speaker walking through the streets, walking through the crowds, and it can also be indicative of his being moved by the suffering that he's seeing all around him. And the silent crowd are those who are unemployed, who don't have a voice in this capitalist system, who have nothing within this capitalist system, and like I said, not even a voice. So if we have a look at the poem line for line, I'm going to go through it stanza by stanza. This is how I've decided to do the notes. It might look quite overwhelming at first, but if you just pause and you have a look through it all and you see how everything fits together, it really does make a lot of sense after that. So let's read through stanza 1. Moving through the silent crowd who stand behind dull cigarettes, These men who idle in the road, I have the sense of falling light. So moving through the silent crowd, obviously it is the first line of the poem as well as the title. That moving through is the speaker, is the person who is moving in the streets. And when we move into there to silent crowd, that's actually an oxymoron because crowds are typically very, very loud. And so it is that figurative meaning of these people who are silent because, you know, they have no voice in the system. And crowd shows that there's a lot of them. It's not just one or two people who are unemployed, it's a lot of people who are unemployed, who have no voice, who have no money, who have no jobs, who stand behind dull cigarettes. This implies a life at standstill, a subdued living. There's no excitement, there's no purpose. Not even cigarettes bring joy. Nothing has meaning, nothing has purpose. And that idea of standing behind dull cigarettes shows that there's no individual identity. It's just this crowd of people who are unemployed, who have all been affected by this Great Depression, by this system that has failed them. These men who idle in the road. Now, idle is typically the word that you would use for a stationary car that still has the engine running. And the impression that it gives here is that, you know, there's these men doing nothing. They're just standing in the road. There's a sense of laziness. But is it maybe also referring to these men who are looking for a job? You know, so like a car that's standing idle, the car's not off. It's not doing nothing. It's idling. You know, the engine is ready to go. And so for me, it gives this impression of these men, you know, they don't have a job, but there's this buzz of they are looking for something. But obviously, as we look at the line that came before that, who stand behind dull cigarettes, I think that it's probably leaning more towards them being lazy, just, you know, wandering around in the road, not really having a sense of purpose, not having a sense of meaning. I have the sense of falling light. Now, this line does seem a little bit out of place because, you know, he's showing all these men and describing these men, and then suddenly I have the sense of falling light. Now, this could be referring to the sun actually setting, you know, the falling light, the dusk coming. But it could also be referring to another day of nothing. The light is falling for these men who have nothing to live for and nothing to look forward to. There's a sense of hopelessness, of, oh, just another day that's gone by. And falling light can also refer to their hope that is dwindling, their sense of meaning that is dwindling, the light in their life, you know, the joy, the excitement, the purpose is falling, it's dying, and soon these men will have nothing. And you'll see in stanza 4 that really links to stanza 4 where it says they stare through with hungry eyes and that kind of stuff. So the falling light, there's definitely a figurative meaning of these men's lives that just are losing purpose and losing meaning the whole way throughout. The second stanza says, they lounge at corners of the street and greet friends with a shrug of shoulder and turn their empty pockets out, the cynical gestures of the poor. The stanza at first glance seems very judgmental. I mean, they lounge at corners, shrug of shoulder, turn their pockets out, cynical gestures. Or is it commenting on these people's lives and what they don't have to live for, you know, the lack of purpose and that kind of stuff? So we see here they lounge at corners of the street. Lounge continues the mood of idle that we saw in the previous stanza, with that kind of idea of laziness, not really doing anything, just kind of standing around. Once again, is this a judgment that he's placing on these people, or is it an observation of, wow, they genuinely have nothing to live for, and so they're lounging about, you know, they're just doing whatever to pass the time. And greet friends with a shrug of shoulder. Greeting friends means it's the same crowd of people on the street. You know, they've made friends with the other unemployed people. That's how often they're on the streets and how many of them are on the streets. With a shrug of shoulders. This is kind of like a nonchalant kind of feeling. It links back to idle, it links back to lounge, and the alliteration there provides us with that sense of defeat, that lack of optimism, just shrug of the shoulder, it is what it is kind of thing. And turn their empty pockets out. This is that gesture of like taking their pockets out of the pants and showing that they have no money. And this is kind of the first time that Spender is directly addressing the poverty, showing that they have nothing, like literally nothing. So whereas the previous stanza was very much, you know, nothing in their life, no purpose, very kind of philosophical and abstract, this is they literally have no money in their pockets. They are literally quite poor. the cynical gestures of the poor. For someone to become cynical, it usually takes a while for them to get quite jaded and to kind of have this not so optimistic view of the world. And so it shows that these men have been poor for a while. They've become so jaded in that time that they haven't been able to provide for their family. And this could be why they idle, why they lounge, why they shrug, because they're cynical of life. Well, you know what, life sucks and it's not going to change, so why even try? And that kind of attitude, that very cynical, pessimistic attitude that they have. And so when you read that line, it makes the previous line of turning their empty pockets out almost seem like they're doing it as like a showing each other as a joke, like, yeah, look, another day of not having anything. And it gives you this very kind of pessimistic, jaded view of these men who have nothing and really, have nothing else to do with their lives. This is when the poem starts to get a little bit maybe confusing. So stick with me. Now they've no work, like better men who sit at desks and take much pay. They sleep long nights and rise at 10 to watch the hours that drain away. The now they've no work, that now implies a time before when they did have work. And so, that commentary is showing that these men are not just lazy for the sake of being lazy. They once did have work and they once had purpose, but since this system that failed them economically and socially and politically, now they have nothing. And so it's not like they wouldn't be, it's not like they're working just for the sake of not working. There's literally nothing to do because they had it before and now there's nothing. Like better men who sit at desks and take much pay. Now, the speaker might be criticizing the poor by comparing them to these better men who have jobs, who work and sit at desks and get money and that kind of stuff. But he could also be showing the inferiority complex that the poor men have, which is kind of that idea of they know that they're not better men. There's a sense of hopelessness that, oh, well, we're not better men, so might as well lounge and idle and shrug and that kind of stuff. And so there's a couple of interpretations that you could see there. They sleep long nights and rise at 10. The they there is ambiguous. Is he referring to the poor men who don't go to work so they can sleep the whole night and wake up at 10 because there's no work to go to? They can do whatever they want. They can wake up at 10, go and lounge on the street corners, greet their friends, shrug their shoulders, all that kind of stuff. Or is it referring to the better men who are the few privileged in the capitalist society who can enjoy a life like this, where yes, they do have a job and they do earn money, but it's a very luxurious kind of life where they can sleep and they can wake up at 10 and go to their work. And that's kind of a commentary on the unfairness of the capitalist system, where some people are in poverty and others can get money and have this luxurious life of kind of doing whatever they want. Or is it showing that better men work long hours while these poorer men, these others, sleep long hours? Is that the comparison that's being made here through these words? So like I said, once again, there's a couple of interpretations here, and all of them work. And so whatever you decide to go with, just make sure that you can actually substantiate what you are going with. And the last line there, it says, to watch the hours that drain away. The diction there really gives us hopelessness. Drain away is not a happy, optimistic phrase. When something drains away, it's giving this kind of long time consuming thing, or obviously, like when you drain things down a drain, it's not the nicest thing to have to deal with. And kind of the feeling that I get from this is like literally when you're sitting in a lesson that you can't wait to end, and the time just is draining away, like it's just not happening, it's not moving, it's not going anywhere, and you just want to get out of this lesson. And so that's what we see here in this last line. And so there's nothing that these men can do. It's another day passing without work, and it's all they can do at the same time is watch the hours drain away because they don't have work. And so it's this very sad kind of feeling that you get there of, they can't do anything, and so all they can do is watch the time because, that's all there is left for them. And now the last stanza, which says here, I'm jealous of the weeping hours. They stare through with such hungry eyes. I'm haunted by these images. I'm haunted by their emptiness. And so now we move away kind of from his observations, and now we're seeing the speaker's personal feelings that are not just observations, they're actually how he's feeling about what he's been seeing. So I'm jealous of the weeping hours. I'm going to start with weeping hours there. The hours is repeated from the previous stanza, and it shows that time is precious. No matter what class you are in or where you are, time is precious. And weeping hours here, this beautiful personification of the hours that are weeping because these men are not achieving their potential. The hours are just going by and nothing is happening in them because these men don't have jobs. And so there's this sense of heartache, there's this despondency that we feel in weeping hours. Beautiful personification. And there he says, I'm jealous of the weeping hours. Is he jealous of their free time? Like, is he like, oh, well, you know, look at them just lounging about, I wish I also had that? Is he jealous of that? And if he is, he clearly doesn't understand the depths of their suffering. These men are not idle and lounging and shrugging because, oh, well, look at us, you know, we're not going to do anything. It's because they literally can't find work. It's because they literally have nothing else to do. And so it's kind of like you ask the question there of, is he maybe like looking at this the wrong way of, oh, well, look how much free time they have, I wish that I had that. But it's like, no, they have free time because they're suffering. It's not really free time. Okay, so that's kind of where we look at the word jealous. It's a very strange word to use there, but it's all part of that commentary. They stare through with such hungry eyes. Stare through implies they're staring straight through him. They don't even see him. It's this lack of thought, this lack of emotion, the starvation that has taken over. And remember, that can be starvation in the sense of they're hungry for food, they don't have food, and starvation in that they're hungry for purpose. They want meaning in their lives and they have nothing. And so it's just these empty stares at this man who is observing them because they have nothing else. And then where he says, I'm haunted by these images, I'm haunted by their emptiness. That anaphora, that repetition of I'm haunted, emphasizes his unsettled feelings. He leaves the street that he's moved through and he feels unsettled. He feels haunted by what he's seen. The images are his observations, and that emptiness relates back to everything he's observed about these men. The lack of purpose, the lack of meaning, and just, you know, like the weeping hours, all of that kind of stuff. And the poem ends on this very unsettling, kind of depressing mood of he's walked out of the street and there's been no closure, there's been no solution to these very sad things that he's seen. He has to walk out of there and still just think about them and still just, you know, reminisce on these things because it's not going anywhere. And there was no solution at the time and there was nothing to help these people. And so all he can do is be haunted by it. And it gives that commentary on this problem that is not going away, the system that has failed these people so badly, and how it haunts him. And remember, the speaker, we assume here is privileged. We assume he is not in the same class, in the same space as these men that he's observing. And so it's that idea of he's seeing these people who are different to him, who are suffering in the same street that he walks on, the same street that he lives on, and there's nothing he can do for them because this is the system, this is the world that they are in. And so there we really see a lot of Stephen Spender's worldview and ideology come through, especially towards the end of this poem, where he's haunted by these problems in the world that he can't solve, and that it seems that there are no solutions for them. That is Moving Through the Silent Crowd. It's a really, really beautiful poem, really lovely social commentary. The way that you want to study for this poem is you obviously want to understand the themes, you want to understand the meaning, you want to know all of the kind of line-by-line analysis of what each line means, where you've got your poetic devices, your figures of speech, all of that kind of stuff. My greatest advice that I can give to you: print out a blank poem and do the analysis on the poem for yourself. See how much you remember after listening to this lesson, after studying the poem, and then do the analysis for yourself. Create questions for yourself. Create a little mini, poetry test for yourself for this poem. One of the greatest ways to study poetry is with study groups, where you explain the poem to each other, you discuss the poem with each other, because at the end of the day, if you can explain this poem with its meanings, with its different interpretations, that kind of stuff, in your own words to somebody else, it means you've got it. It means that you can do it. Another good exercise to do is to see which of the other scene poems in the syllabus you can relate this to, you can link this to, and then do a nice little comparative paragraph between Moving Through the Silent Crowd and any other of the poems that you feel they can relate to. Look at the same themes, same commentary, all of that kind of stuff. A really, really great way to test your understanding. You want to engage that critical thinking. Remember, the IEB finals are really all about the critical thinking. It's not enough for you to just know, okay, cool, there's a personification there, there's an anaphora there, kind of stuff. You really do need to understand the deeper meaning. And I think it would be a good idea to also maybe link it to current affairs, link it to global issues that you've seen in the world, and how this poem could be used to provide commentary on global issues in our world. If you would like access to the notes, you can scan this QR code. You can also go to my Instagram page. The link in the bio there will take you to the Google Drive that's got pretty much all my resources so far. But otherwise, for this specific poem, you can access the notes with this QR code. Thank you so much for joining me for this lesson, and I will be uploading another one very, very soon.